So, nau mai hara mai. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to today's Rangahau Rising. My name's Nick Waipara. I'm just going to open our hui today with karakia timatanga. E te whānau whaia te mātauranga kia marama, kia whai take ngā mahi katoa, tu maia, tu kaha, araha atu, araha mai, tātou e tātou katoa. Te hei Māori ora. So kia ora everyone. That was just to bless our hui today. For those of you who've joined us, we have just a few housekeeping before we start. We're going to leave all the questions and comments to the end of the presentation. So if you have an epiphany or hot burning question as we go through today's kōrero, just put them in the chat. And also we have wonderful Sarah from Bioprotection Aotearoa who's going to put various links and other information. So keep an eye on the chat, and any questions or pātai we'll have at the end. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Salene Schloffel-Armstrong. I'm really excited about her kōrero today. The mahi she's going to present is Are We Still Repeating the Past? Tracing the Norms of Biosecurity Across Time on Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū Banks Peninsula. A little bit about our wonderful presenter today. She's a human geographer. That's a cool title. Whose work is concerned with collective public resources, infrastructure, and everyday sites that offer glimpses of radical, more just futures. She's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at Te Whare Wanaka-Aoraki, Lincoln University, and Waipapa Taumatarau University of Auckland. With Bioprotection Aotearoa, she's interrogating the shifting politics of biosecurity, land use, and species belonging to the amazing rohe of Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū, which is Banks Peninsula. So I'm really, no mai haere mai, welcome Salene, really looking forward to your kōrero today, and be on your way. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nick. Thank you so much for the introduction. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Salene ho. I'm Salene. I'm a political geographer based in Tāmaki Makaurau, but working with a team at BA through Lincoln University as well. I will just share my screen with you, get my PowerPoint going. Is that all working there, Nick? Perfect.
It's coming through perfect.
Awesome.
Excellent.
That's a good first step. Thank you. Okay, tēnā koutou, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to this talk today. I'm really excited. I also thank you for abiding by the date change. I was sick last week and I'm still feeling a little bit of a foggy brain. So please excuse a little bit of that and excuse my I've written myself a speech, which I don't usually do, but I thought in case my brain leaves me alone today, it's probably a good idea. So the title of my talk today, as Nick said, Are We Still Repeating the Past? Is part of my work as a postdoc, as part of Bioprotection Aotearoa. So I'm within a social science team based at Lincoln, and I'm working on Today I'm talking about a piece of ongoing work. So I'm currently still undertaking this. This was kind of the first piece of the puzzle in this work. And all of this research will be based on Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū Banks Peninsula. So I've taken on this slice of work myself, but it's part of our bigger project. And what I present today in particular reflects a lot of collaborative work and discussion and thinking from our broader team. So just because it's such a great photo, I thought I had to show you who they are. Sorry, Sylvia, but it is a great photo. So Bioprotection Futures itself with MBA is a really amazing collaborative team led by Sylvia Nissen and Mark Tadaki. but it's also consisting of Eleni Carrera, Jasmine Hodder-Swain, Ramsey Tube, Raven Cretney, and then also our amazing summer scholar we had with us last year, Jamie Anahera Shadbolt. So over the last year, since I started my role at BA, I've been focusing on doing historical analysis. So to try and understand how our biosecurity system emerged in Aotearoa. And we're focused as a team on understanding really our current and future biosecurity system, how it's working, how it may work in the future, or how it may need to be transformed. So to understand best where we're going, I first turned to the past, and I chose a place to situate this work to understand some of the kind of past and present processes of land use and biosecurity practices through a specific case study or context. So this presentation I'm going to do is based on a paper that I'm currently writing, which is taking a broad period of time, so from 1825 to 1925, a century ago, to understand the emergence of our biosecurity system during this early settler colonial period. So what I found in this research collection was that many of these roots of our biosecurity ideas and practices were set in this early period. So many of these roots I still see acting as through lines. So they're still visible within the structures or norms of our current system, not in the same way as they were, not to the same extent as they were perhaps, but they're still visible as often unseen, but still playing a role at shaping how we imagine and enact biosecurity in Aotearoa. So to situate myself on the peninsula during this century, my research drew predominantly on document analysis of historical newspapers from which to understand how narratives around species emerged within predominantly settler communities on the peninsula. So I have spent a lot of time on papers past, looking for issues of the Littleton Times and the Akaroa Mail and Banks Peninsula Advertiser, from the conception of these papers until 1925, for any mention of the term pest or weed. So across that period, there were 4,833 results for weed and 8,502 for pest, from which I disregarded entries that weren't actually about those things. So as well as this newspaper data, I also drew on early Māori evidence of species presence and environmental transformation on the peninsula, as well as early settler histories, British and French colonial correspondence, farm diaries and records, which were very generously shared with me from the Aotearoa Museum collection as well. So from all this data and all this information about pests and weeds, I collated it into themes through a process of reflexive thematic analysis. So the process I went through created a really rich data set. As you can imagine, 8,000 is quite a big number. There's a lot of interesting directions within there, and they've opened up lots of avenues for my research. But so today I'm going to focus on some of the broad thematic findings. So illustrating 5 repeating norms of biosecurity that I saw first emerging in this period and are still present to varying degrees potentially in our current system. So these norms were teased out of the data I found through discussion at Hui with my broader team, and also drawn a lot from the work of Eleni Carrera, who is currently looking at our contemporary biosecurity system and seeing where those echoes might be between the past and the present. So the 5 repeating norms or through lines that we identify in this early period are targeting singular species as threats, the protection of economic production, a reliance on civic duty and citizen labour, the use of biocontrols to restore a sense of balance, and the sidelining of Māori knowledge and resistance. So I'm going to elaborate on each of these norms, and given that I don't have that much time today, I will draw on just a few specific examples for each one to hopefully try and illustrate the points in the time that I have with everyone today. So the first one here, an incredible image from the Aotearoa Museum of someone who was culling rabbits on the peninsula, Old Harry. Historical analysis in Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū between 1825 and 1925 clearly illustrated a repeating pattern in approaches to biosecurity, where species are individually designated as threats. So in the early years of colonial settlement, certain plants and animals came to be deemed as exhibiting unruly behaviours and therefore named as pests or weeds. Species were seen as pests or weeds due to their surprising growth, so maybe the scale and speed, their growth in the wrong place, so their mobility and spread, or if they interfered with the growth of other species that were seen as more valuable. So, as individual species were designated as pests or weeds and therefore unwanted or seen as in the wrong place, then reactive responses directed at each singular species followed. So, despite a widespread belief initially within much of the colonial population in the early 1800s that species introductions would do no important harm to the landscape of Aotearoa and its existing non-human life, many new species did quickly begin to flourish in unexpected and often really luxuriant ways. So this was seen sometimes as a blessing. So if it could be harnessed for profit, that growth was seen as a blessing, or as a threat if that growth looked to impinge on maybe the conversion of land for establishing agricultural production. So as early as 1861, weeds were being narrated publicly as limiting the safe mobility of settlers around the peninsula. You're going to get some really choice quotes from these historical newspapers today. That's really what I'm drawing on today. So as the Lyttelton Times reported in April 1861, Dampier's Bay's roads were in a bad condition since the start of the last winter, with large chasms, some of them 4 or 5 feet in depth and overgrown with weed, occurred at intervals of a few yards, offering every facility to the passenger, whether on foot or horseback, on the obtaining of a broken limb or neck upon the shortest notice. So after a species exhibits troublesome growth, like the vigorous weed affecting the roads, it would then be targeted for management and control. So this was a highly reactive approach where management strategies were only considered after a singular species was identified as a threat to colonial settlement, agricultural production, for example. So newspaper reports offer an abundance of evidence of the reactive nature of pest management during this period. New weed and pest incursions are noted within these local papers, yet frequently by the time the pest or weed is reported in the paper as a concern, it has actually already spread widely. So as reported in 1887, drawing attention to the California thistle as a weed threat occurred too slowly, as it would appear that this noxious weed is more prevalent in the Canterbury district than is generally supposed. So the example of the thistle illustrates how conversations about management emerged after species had already become reasonably embedded in the environment, in contrast with a more proactive approach. Mobilization to the management of emerging unruly species was difficult and took time and resources, due in part to the singular species at once approach. So specific plants or animals were cast as the threat, and decisions were made about which were the greatest threat and therefore most deserving of resources to attempt to manage it or eradicate it. These shifting hierarchies of threat were continually constructed to argue for the management of particular species that were seen to be the most damaging at the time. So in 1872, instructions in the Lyttelton Times titled How to Kill It, about the best way to kill sorrel, described it as the greatest pest as a weed we have to deal with. So in our contemporary biosecurity system, management approaches often more proactive, but still often hold to the strategy of targeting singular species as the threat to our environment or our agricultural system. The second repeating norm identified in this work points to the protection of economic production as a key logic of the biosecurity system. And this image here is of a man cutting cocksfoot grass on the peninsula. The strategies and tools utilised to practice biosecurity during this period were primarily wielded in response to protecting agricultural exports. So during this early colonial period on the peninsula, the transformation of land to monocultural, usually monocultural agricultural pasture, was seen as inevitable by many settlers. And initially, weeds were not understood as a threat to that process. Yet, as early as 1865, the pages of the Lyttelton Times noted that despite confident assertions by some that the wheat would not be injured by the weed, time has now shown that in many instances, serious damage has ensued from it. The transformation of land into pastures for growing grass seed in particular emerged in the 1860s as a profitable, scalable industry on the peninsula, as it grew readily in places where the bush had been burnt off. Yet weeds quickly became an issue for these farmers trying to grow grass seed for export. In 1883, the Lyttelton Times reports that the sorrel difficulty is a perennial one. And the article continues on to note that this list of weeds with which our farmers have to contend is steadily on the increase. Yet also argues that this cannot be avoided without annual large importation of seed. So although the increase in weeds is seen as a problem, the importation of seed for continuing agricultural production and the export of grass seed is seen as inevitable and not to be questioned. So weeds are simply an unfortunate byproduct of that global trade relation that can never be changed. And this narrative understands really that and frames that biosecurity threats will arrive because exports must continue unchallenged. Yet even at that time, counter-narratives existed with fears about the weeds changing the productivity of land on the peninsula emerging clearly from the earliest years. There was widespread awareness that the land had been depleted, and this had created the conditions for particular species to thrive. So a Saturday story in the Lyttelton Times in 1872 explains, in many instances, the land has been overcropped. One straw crop is made to follow another, and often two of the same sort in succession, until the land produces very little but straw, or more frequently sorrel, or some other equally obnoxious weed. 2 years later, similar concerns were raised again, arguing that something needs to be done to restore the land on the peninsula. This piece in February 1874 cautioned that if something is not done to recuperate the soil, it will in time refuse to yield a crop of any description, either a rich crop of sorrel or some other weed, which is almost indestructible. So by the 1920s, this new normalized pastoral landscape of the peninsula, a monocultural plain of cocksfoot, became a fading star, due in part to these weeds. The cocksfoot industry's demise, due partially to the infiltration of weeds onto the peninsula, is also connected to what we deem our third repeating norm. So this reliance on civic duty and citizen labour. Attempting to maintain monocultures by managing an increasingly long list of nuisance species was really resource intensive and relied heavily on landowner labour. So widespread labour shortages during the First World War in particular saw weed, disease and pests such as the cocksfoot thrip gain a strong foothold on the peninsula. During this time, attention was also given to underlying environmental conditions that enabled weeds to proliferate. Bush-burnt areas that were initially so fertile in growing cocksfoot were noted to also be exceptionally fertile for weeds. So the management of pests and weeds has been intricately tied to colonial ideas of citizenship in Aotearoa since the earliest years of European settlement. So the monitoring, the maintenance and labour of pest and plant removal has been argued as central to the ongoing economic success of the nation, and often a responsibility laid at the feet of individual land occupiers. So New Zealanders then, and today perhaps, are expected to perform what Kezia Baker refers to as a specific kind of biosecure citizenship. So we argue that this performance of biosecurity emerged early in the history of colonial New Zealand. A complaint to the Times in 1868 about the Scotch thistle illustrates the lack of resourcing from the government for pest management, often leading to the spreading weed becoming the responsibility of individuals or land occupiers. So it read in 1868, "The Scotch thistle is rapidly becoming a pest in our swamp lands. In former years, inspectors were appointed to see that they were kept under, and many thousands of thistles were eradicated by their orders. Now it is everybody's business to do this, and consequently nobody is doing it." It was clearly understood that weeds and pests are very mobile. They don't abide by these land boundaries. Therefore, individual responsibility on each piece of land is not enough. It requires a group, a collective effort, hence these narratives of civic duty. So as this rather long quote, but interesting letter to the editor in the Littleton Times in 1865 read, "I wish to impress upon those who read this that the eradication of the weed does not concern those alone who live in the immediate neighbourhood of the locality in which it is found growing. For it is not only possible, but highly probable that the high winds of that country may carry a winged seed like that of the thistle many miles before it alights. Therefore, it becomes the interest as well as the positive duty of everyone, however unpleasant it may be, to play the role of an informer, whenever and wherever he may see them growing, to at once give notice to the thistle inspector." So the expectation of citizen labour following civic duty also related to the management of animal species seen as pests. Around the turn of the century, the threat of rabbits became an increasingly key topic for the peninsula community. Concerns about the rabbit threat escalated from the 1890s, actively challenging agricultural landscapes on the peninsula. So as seen in this public notice here, in 1898, the Aotearoa County Council requested a community landowners meeting on the spread of the rabbit pest. So during this very spirited meeting, community members disagreed about the approach to take to the rabbits, arguing over funding, labour, resourcing, responsibility. Similar topics that come up today in these conversations. Mr. R.J. Fleming argued that the peninsula was one of the easiest districts in New Zealand to fence, for it would not take many miles of fencing to fence from sea to sea on any part of the peninsula. And Mr. Knight then countered that a rabbit fence would be most disastrous to everyone by deteriorating the value of property and stopping settlement. This meeting led to surprisingly little movement on the issue. And then by 1907, the Aotearoa Mail reported that, in comparison to a decade ago, that for every 100 rabbits then, there are thousands today, and that the whole peninsula risked becoming nothing but a veritable rabbit warren if something is not done pretty promptly. In 1908, a rabbit board was set up to organise attempts at their management, beginning with the funding and erection of said fence to protect the last of the peninsula from their arrival. And rabbits were then continually managed without eradication on the peninsula until the rabbit boards were dismantled, at which point their numbers skyrocketed quickly again. So the use of biological agents to control the growth of some species was also begun very early in the colonial period in Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū, as well as across Aotearoa more generally. So biocontrols often took the form of an introduction of a new species as an attempt to balance the effects of the other species. Initially, plant and animal introductions into Aotearoa were completely unregulated. Many species were transported to the country by those that had the financing and logistical support to do so. In 1864, the North Canterbury Acclimatisation Society had been founded to kind of collectivise such efforts within the region. And this picture here shows the grounds, the acclimatisation grounds, down against the river in the park in Christchurch, where they would acclimatise their incoming animals and plants. The benefit of introducing new species was initially framed as inevitable and unanimously good. So, as claimed in the Littleton Times in 1864, there is no person in the colony who will not benefit in some manner by the systematic introduction of new species of the animal and vegetable kingdoms. However, certain species that grew well, really well, and exhibited what was seen as unruly behaviours were then often framed as pests or weeds and seen to require management, as we've discussed. The introduction of another species, framed as a natural predator, was often presented as the solution to the first species' unruliness. So this ongoing train of introductions of species as solution emerged quickly on the peninsula too. So the notion that innocuous species could be introduced to counter pesty behaviour was present from the very earliest stages of the French colony at Aotearoa. In 1840, Lavard wrote back to Paris proposing a solution to the threat posed by rats. So he wrote, "If the company sent up more expeditions, it would be good if it sent as many cats as it could find. They would perhaps get rid of the millions of rats which are living at our expense, destroying our plantations, and would be a permanent blight on our agriculture." So the introduction of new species onto the peninsula were often related to a Western hierarchy of value, where existing species in Aotearoa were seen as deficient in some way. Additionally, these hierarchies and the destruction of bush and animal habitats had decimated many populations. So a report on the acclimatised meeting in 1868 in the Littleton Times reads that the plains of Canterbury originally abounded with quails, larks, and other birds that fed upon insects and their larvae. These the settlers had ruthlessly destroyed. In this meeting, the destruction of native bird life was understood as something done by settlers and having a huge direct impact on agricultural production because of this contingent huge explosion in insect life. So at this meeting, the society was debating what species they could introduce to replace the lost bird life and which species they would choose, which species would increase the most rapidly and spread over the fields in the greatest numbers. So eventually, sparrows were introduced to the country as a potential solution, although their exact means of arrival is quite hotly debated. Nonetheless, sparrows quickly then became referred to as the feathered robins of gardens due to their interest in seed and their own unruliness, doing a different thing than what they were intended for. So by 1874, many farmers were vocally speaking out against the Acclimatisation Society due to their support of the introduction of the sparrow, a bird which was a perfect pest to them. So biological control agents are clearly more tightly managed today. However, biocontrols are still often framed as a solution to the unruliness of a singular species, so that's quite similar. And regulations have greatly increased, and a large amount of biocontrol work today occurs at a microscopic scale. Nonetheless, released biocontrol agents still infrequently receive the funding or support for ongoing monitoring to register their broader impacts on the environment as well. So my fifth repeating norm is that Māori, the sidelining of Māori knowledge and Māori resistance in these processes of change. So Māori have consistently resisted the imposition of colonisation, including the European narratives of species belonging and the value of species. So, for example, research shows, Raipika, Mercier, and others show that Māori language newspapers noted biodiversity decline more than a century before it was represented in New Zealand government policy, as well as concerns about environmental changes occurring from European land use practices, including the clearing of land for farming and introduction of exotic species. So mana whenua of Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū consistently raised concerns over this period of time about the harm that came with these new settler colonial understandings of species and the transformation of environment that came with new types of land use, contrasting ideas around land use. So the often used name for the peninsula as Te Pātaka-o-Rākaihautū also exists as clear evidence of its being once as abundant as a bread basket. So the storehouse of Rākaihautū. As Athol Anderson's work and others also illustrates, across this region, Māori created and relied upon large numbers of camps for food gathering, so large numbers of mahinga kai, as many more than human food sources were sporadic and seasonal. So 3 large-scale land purchases in the mid-1800s significantly shifted relationships between Kaitahu and their ancestral lands. And across Te Waipunamu, in 2 decades, between 1844 and 64, Ngāi Tahu were left with barely 1 acre out of every 1,000 acre owned in 1840. Commissions and inquiries by the Crown in the late 1800s offer a very early collected record of Kaitahu leaders' narration of environmental depletion on the peninsula and surrounds during this period of land alienation and settlement. So speaking to a particular inquiry, the 1891 Mackay inquiry, which is about native land law, Hoani Tukao-Wira describes these changes. Now the rivers are stocked with trout, and the lagoons and lakes are dried up, their fish killed, and the weka and other birds destroyed by the process of civilization. He continues on to explain that due to this change and to settlers denying access to other still existing mahinga kai sites, we are unable to maintain ourselves off the land. So Kaitahu claimants drew on a lot of this evidence in their Waitangi Tribunal process alongside evidence collected from the century following. So the destruction and depletion of mahinga kai continued through the 20th century as well. And Rakihia Tau, speaking as a witness in the tribunal process, argued that environmental changes had occurred with little or no consideration for our feelings or our traditions. They note also the cascading harm that came with the drainage of swamps and lakes, the felling of bush, the conversion of land to agricultural use, and the introduction of acclimatized species. So this evidence critiqued both the processes of extraction and imposition that underpinned a lot of these changes as well. So as our colleague Jamie Anahera-Shadbolt's recent work and that of many other Māori scholars illustrates, throughout the history of Aotearoa's biosecurity system, Māori have often been sidelined in decision-making processes. So critique and resistance to landscape transformation, environmental transformation, degradation of resources of mahinga kai, destruction of species, often sidelined and seen as outliers to a kind of a process that is seen as to these other norms that are seen as more powerful or more normative, expected and inevitable changes. So even today, Jamie's work talked about as Māori participation has expanded in terms of recognition, engagement and procedural inclusion, actual statutory decision-making authority under the Biosecurity Act remains largely unchanged. So these 5 norms I've identified can all be traced back to the century between 1825 and 1925, and the extent to which we think they might manifest in our current system is variable between each norm. And I'm sure everyone will have their own opinions on where these norms show up or don't show up. But they also all relate to each other and sit within a shifting hierarchy of values of their own. So, for example, as seen in recent research, biosecurity responses to threats like Cody dieback or myrtle rust, threats to Cody, something with important cultural value, in particular to Māori. Responses to those are often weaker or slower or less well-funded than those threats that might occur to export crops. So are these... is this the presence of some of these norms still operating today? And are some of those norms considered more important over others, even when we're not thinking about them all actively in the same way? So there's a few things to leave you to think about. So that's kind of the first part of my research, which is still wrapping up, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. That is thinking about where we've come from, where the biosecurity system has emerged from, and where I'm moving now is starting to look on the same peninsula, but look forward. So look at the present and look to the future of what's happening in terms of changing ideas about land use. So looking at the history of environmental transformation on that peninsula and seeing all these different experiments that are currently happening around recloaking or covenanting or different ways of thinking about the future of that landscape again. So I'm currently undertaking fieldwork and interviews and really excited to be talking to more people about all of that work as well. And I will leave that there for any questions. Thank you so much.
Kia ora. That was a fantastic kōrero. Thanks, Salene.
Thanks, Nick.
Obviously, those wanting to have any pātai or questions, could you put them into the chat? That would be great. Well, I guess the first, wonderful kōrero.
Thank you.
And those old pests, that hearing them being introduced, like sparrows, rats, rabbits, Californian thistle, it was like a death wish. But
Yeah.
the first question is, do you feel like it was that thing about we must import seed at all costs, and the economic driver overruled the importation of Californian thistle seed, and then you bring it back into today's realm where you have the terrible incursion through seed lines like the importation of ryegrass, and that blackgrass arrived into Canterbury, and velvet leaf seed coming in with beet fodder seed. So it's sort of like today. I really do think hearing those horrible, I call your kōrero, your first part, the horrible histories of
Yeah.
biosecurity. Taking that through to the future, how do you feel like learning what you have from a remarkable historical resources you have there, taking that through to today? That's a really important part of your mahi. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what was really interesting about reading these papers is firstly how lyrical the language was and how amazing it was really to read them. But secondly, how similar the discussions and the issues and the situations were, how much it's changed, how many things seemed like they were conversations that maybe could have occurred in the same way now. So I think it is really important to also, it's been really interesting to look over a large period of time, because I think when we're in the nitty-gritty and when people are doing the work of pest or weed management at a particular time, you're so close to the issue that you might not see that this issue may have happened with a different species 40 years ago. So it was kind of the spread of a century allowed us to see the repeating nature of some of these discussions, where it would be discussion about the Scotch thistle, then the California thistle, then broom, then gorse, and it would be different each time, but there were bits that were the same. And I think those, the economic driver and the sense that biosecurity risk is just inevitable because uh, I'll have a little look at that in a second. The biosecurity risk is inevitable because we must continue to do the economic system as we've set it up. So not even that it needs to, just that it changes, it can't be done. So we'll deal with whatever the threat is because the way we're doing the economic system and the export won't change. So it's the response elsewhere that has to change, not kind of that first bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kia ora. And I'd like to draw your attention to a current couple of problems in that, well, not problems, that thing around economics is the free trade deals New Zealand is doing. And Blueberries New Zealand have just started a campaign at huge concern at the risks, importation risks around imported blueberry. And it sort of, it's history repeating. And I just feel like everything you've said, and we're still doing it. It may be, the country benefits from free trade agreements, yet there are industries and landowners actually talking about, well, hang on. So yeah, it's quite shocking that over 150 years, as you said, in this rohe of the peninsula, we history is repeating. But kia ora, Pam, Pam Richardson, kia ora, tēnā koe. Today, our landowners have changed how they look at the land. Um, are you finding that in your current mahi as well?
Please, Pam, elaborate if you would like to. That would be awesome.
Look,
I,
yeah, I'm Pam Richardson. I've got a farm in Pigeon Bay, and I live, son's on the farm, and I live in Devotials. But I've been involved with weeds and pests for a very long time and farmed on Banks Peninsula for almost 40 years. Look, farming and conservation, it's looked at so differently today that we're not wanting to destroy everything. We're not bringing in a lot of new pasture. There are some areas in the right and the appropriate places. And no, your story is an amazing story, and I wish more people would hear it. And I just love how you've used the museum. I'm on the museum advisory board. But look, no, but certainly those stories about those weeds and the rats, and you need the cats and whatever it was, the rabbits.
Yes.
They all still impact today.
Yeah.
But things like the rabbits, we have a separate targeted rabbit rate on Banks Peninsula. There are a lot of things that Banks Peninsula farmers have talked about. Probably I can't talk about everything here today with you, Salene. We need to catch up sometime.
Yes, we will. We will.
Absolutely
Thank you.
amazing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pam. I really appreciate you coming because I think that really speaks well too to the next bit of the research that we're doing, which is very much interested in how on that same landscape, land is being thought about differently. And that's by farmers, by conservationists, by all these things in between. So it's really exciting to kind of go from here to think about what's happening presently and then what everyone's thinking about for the future as well. It's really cool.
Yeah, kia ora, Pam, and
Thank you.
also acknowledging the historic work of, I guess, the likes of farmers and people like Hugh Wilson, the amazing botanist that reimagined the way you use weeds like gorse and bracken and use them as a nursery, and you don't have to destroy it, and what ecology can be restored. And you think, I mean, that came from your region, Pam, those sorts of that rethinking from people on the land. So just acknowledging kia ora for that.
And also
Actually,
thank you for the shout out to the Aotearoa Museum as well, because they were fantastic and they were so helpful, and they have incredible resources as well as farm receipts and Coxfoot sale receipts that Dan was excited someone was looking at them because it's been a while since they've been looked at in the collection. So an incredible resource for researchers as well.
probably one of the best regions or rohe areas to be doing this, actually, Salene. Kia ora, Alice. Alice has asked, what is the first piece of evidence of Pākehā alarm at weed incursions of Indigenous biodiversity? Was this influenced by Māori confronting the loss of birds, forests and swamps?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alice, and feel free to elaborate if you want, if I don't answer it properly. I'm not really able to look at it properly here, but I would say from broadly looking at my data, um, it was surprising to me how soon Pākehā showed alarm at weed incursion and danger to native flora and fauna. So it wasn't a normative, I wasn't really able to cover it here. It was definitely not the major perspective I saw, but I saw it as a thread through these resources from really early on. And I don't know about the relationship of it to kind of Māori perception of change and environmental degradation, but I would be sure that that is part of that a lot of the time. But there were definitely counter narratives to this, like counter narratives to the importation of new species really quickly, and kind of the sense that there were so many incredible quotes I'll include in other parts of my work where the comment would basically say, it's so sad these things are failing and this lake is looking like this and this species is gone, but inevitable, the ball turns, we must continue. So it was like often at the same time an acknowledgement and just the sense that it's inevitable. But that's a really interesting question. I definitely want to kind of look at those linkages more as well.
By just a comment on top of Alice's question, there is, through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that now oversees the importation of biological control or biocontrol agents. There is a lot of scrutiny from Māori and industry and others, non-Māori, around the way New Zealand imports anything new. So there's quite a spectrum of narrative. In fact, there is, I would contend, a high degree of scrutiny and review on biocontrol given the stoat or the, things like that. So you do see quite a number of voices of concern still to this day, even though biocontrollers and people involved in biocontrol science will say risk, the science around risk and target, and is so much better. So I guess there is that system of review which we of course rely on.
Yeah.
So kia ora, thank you, Alice. Steve, kia ora, Steve. Thanks, Salene. Have we satisfactorily restricted the sale and spread of pest plants from garden shops or pest animals from the pet shops? Gosh, great question. The pressure on individual rights seems strong.
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. Thank you for coming along as well. This is not so much my expertise in the kind of research I'm doing, but I know that there are a lot of people involved in BA and that are interested in this type of thing. And I've heard a lot of concern about deregulated spaces. So whether garden shops are able to or are, but also the rise of people selling pets or selling plants on Facebook marketplaces, on Trade Me, buying things like this online. So there's all these kind of informal networks that seem to be a real place of spread. So I don't know specific names of people working on that at the moment, but I do know that there's a lot of interest in working out how big a problem those areas are.
Yeah, things like, what is it, the blue tongue skink, these animal collectors, and there's a menagerie of of things people collect and still import into the country. And even those huge cats that look like panthers. I can't remember what they're called, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing again. There's a note from BA following the theme of present biosecurity, our latest podcast. Yeah, shout out to that. So there's the link there. Thanks again, Pam. Wonderful story, and appreciate the support and use you've had of the amazing Aotearoa Museum. It really is. Yeah. Do you think, I mean, obviously current incursion of the hypervirulent bird flu
Yeah.
that's now, gosh, good grief. I think if you work in biosecurity or aware of biosecurity, Aotearoa, New Zealand and Hawaii are your places. Just given that breadth of incursion that we have, and I guess the former geographic isolation that places like Aotearoa have. And yes, we may be the last to get the bird flu, but that doesn't mean the impact's any less. I guess your mahi is going to have quite a lot of current, significance or relevance.
Yeah, it's interesting with I guess a lot of this historical research as well. It was so interesting to me to see how, with like bird flu arriving and things like that, that obviously species travel and move, and the restrictions and idea of boundaries don't work. But so much of the introduction of species to New Zealand was so intentional and so difficult to do. So it took a lot of effort and logistics and resources and money to continually try and bring trout here, or to bring um, uh, to bring something like a stoat here. It actually was really difficult. So the amount of effort people were putting in to do this, I think, was the thing that was incredible to me. It was not an accidental arrival. It was a really planned, strategically funded thing that they really believed needed to be done. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put in the effort.
So is that the work of the Acclimatization Society you were talking about? Is
Yes,
that what they
yes.
did?
They did that, and they're not. Had no idea about them really until I started this research, and I think a lot of that work has been forgotten. A lot of acclimatization societies too have also merged into hunting and game
Ah,
organizations, so there's like some weird genealogies there as well. But they often there were societies across the country, and they would organize that. Initially, it was individuals or groups that would get together and do it. A wealthy individual would maybe have an idea that would be for hunting or for something else. And then these were like collectives where they would do importations and then raise species and then let them out. And you could send them a letter and ask to buy some pheasants, for example, and they would. So I've looked at a lot of the correspondence. There's some really unbelievable stuff going on. Yeah.
sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but
No, it's you can really laugh because it's so and so normalized and invisible to us a lot of the time now as well. Yeah.
sorry, I'm going off track, but did they bring in the terrible pigeon? You know, the infamous pigeons from London that crap everywhere in Trafalgar Square.
I don't
Is
know,
that
but
responsible
probably.
for that? Because
Yeah, probably.
I mean,
Yeah.
some people call them flying rats, but like, oh my God, I hope they didn't bring those in because that.
No, I think most of the things here that aren't not native to the country would have had a role in it, I would say. Yeah.
I guess tastes change, don't they? I guess.
They do. There was also, it was incredible. There were a few attempts to bring in, or not, I don't think there was an attempt, but there was someone who really thought snakes would be a good addition to the country because they'd make the landscape more exciting. So we're lucky we missed some of those.
I've got no, so Kia ora, I don't mean to laugh, but when you think about the effort, as you say, to establish some of these what we now call pests, this would have been quite incredible. But anyway, Kia ora, Megan, thank you. That's quite a bit of information for you there, Salene, around the Kaituna Valley and Harry Elves.
And
No,
also the Parkinson family, who were big landowners. But I guess just following on from the pheasant conversation,
yes.
only about a year ago that pheasants were being actively bred on the peninsula to be released for I don't know what. But, on the Facebook site, in the Aotearoa Facebook, it was all about how we're releasing pheasants and what a good job we're doing. And those of us that objected to that found it very difficult to find anyone who would think that that wasn't a good idea, and that MPI sort of said, oh, that's not us. And everyone sort of, and it became a bit of everyone was loving the pheasant releasing, and yet nobody was actually pulling them up and going, actually, why are you doing this? And is this helpful?
Oh, that's so strange. That's incredible to know that, Megan. Thank you for your comment as well. So you were finding comments about the hairy owls and the Parkinson's talking about protection.
Yeah, it was all about the setting up of the Pēkos hut track and things like that. But I mean, it's not that far from people releasing pigs, which is happening still on the peninsula, and people breeding pigs and releasing them. It's not a new concept, and it's still going on.
Gosh.
And these are people who think that, that pigs equal kai, and so therefore it's a right to have it.
I see.
Although the peninsula doesn't have pigs traditionally, and they have been released. 2015 is when pigs arrived for us. Well, the second time.
Gosh,
in previous,
really?
Yeah. And so it's not a cultural practice of eating pig. It is people thinking that they have a right to farm conservation land or farmers' land to grow kai that they might wish to hunt at some later stage. And the same goes with pheasants. Nobody's hunting pheasants on the peninsula. And I think it's just they like the look of diversity or something.
That's really interesting. There's I know that pigs are playing a similar role on Aotearoa Great Barrier. Or they've been there for a while, but there's a great mini docuseries someone made called, I think, Pig Politics, that's about kind of these same things happening on that island as well, which the pig feels like it's a really really contested one in these kinds of landscapes at the moment in particular.
Yeah, and I think because it becomes this rewilding concept that, they must be replacing something. But that's a new thing, that rewilding concept, that English rewilding concept, as if we need something like to aerate the soil. I've read about pigs. And yet that's, aerating the soil, actually, they're releasing a whole lot of carbon emissions. And that, if you do a little bit simple Google on that, you see that pigs are creating a lot of harm. And yet people are reframing it to make them look like the good guys that we should be encouraging. And as to what's driving that's pretty interesting, is what people's thinking.
Oh, that's so interesting, Megan. I'll have to look into that more. That's I think also the importation of rewilding into Aotearoa as a concept that seems similar but is inherently different, or trying to get a different outcome than we are with the mammals and all these other things, is just quite an interesting thing to investigate, I think.
I do know that a lot of people discount the biodiversity impact of pigs. The people working on Dactylanthus, or the wood rose, have been trying to re-establish that, and so, where it's been lost or become extinct in some parts of Aotearoa, and are finding if you still have possums and pigs particularly because they're foraging underground, you're not going to get that wood rose back. So, but people want to hunt, as you say. So anyway, it's is there anything, Salene, is there any part of your continuing research? I thought I'd use the opportunity of people here that part of your ongoing research. Is there a call to action, or a call to involve? Are you looking for more people or networks or other people to contribute or participate? Is that something you need or not? Or
I would say I'm just delighted because a lot of people I've already talked to for my next part have come and contributed. So I'm so grateful that you've come along. I'm it's really lovely. So I feel like I've already the people here have already helped me a lot. But I am really excited to be doing more research on the peninsula, and I've had such generosity of connecting to different people already. And I'm coming back down for another 2 weeks in August to do some more in-person chats. So if there's anyone else here that is involved in land use change on the peninsula or interested in these topics broadly, please do send me an email. And if there's someone else that you think would be interesting for me to talk to, I may not have talked to yet, please let me know or tell me to contact them. That would be really great because I feel like I've had a lot of conversations, but there's a lot of ways to go, and it's been really interesting so far. So I'm excited to do more on it over the next few months. And thank you everybody so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, kia ora. And just to thank you for that, Salene. If anyone if you know anyone that wants to see this presentation, or you want to look at it again, or you were late getting on, or there's other people you think might be interested, come to the Bioprotection Aotearoa website and you can see the links there. You come to our news, our webinars, and Salene's kōrero or talk today will be uploaded, but there is also the previous presentations like that of Sarah Herbert on the importation of pests and garden plants, for example. All the previous Rangahau Rising webinars are available online for you to look at, including today's one. So if there's anyone there who you think might want to see what Salene's what her talk and research has amazing talk and research has been about today, please just it's open and I'm available online through the Bioprotection Aotearoa website. So just wanted to thank you all today for coming. Really appreciate both your questions, comments, and including thank you Pam and Megan and others who are actually participating in the work. Kia ora. Thank you to Salene and all the questions. Good luck, all the best for your mahi to come, and it's just been a wonderful kōrero, so thank you. Kia ora to everyone. And take care out there, keep warm, keep safe from all the gremlins of winter, and I'll say tihe mauri ora to your health for the next few cold months. So kia ora everyone, thank you. Oh, and just before we go off, there's the next presentation next month, the 19th of August. So there you go, you can register for that. Kia ora everyone.